I wanted to take a moment today to talk about something that comes up a lot for new folks. And by new folks, I mean folks who are new to movement or coming back to it after a break. And that question is usually, how often do I really need to work out to see progress? I think more importantly, the question actually means, why does frequency matter at all, right? Or at least that's the question that comes up for me, which is like, okay, why? You want me to do 2, 3, 4 times a week? Cool, but why? You know, how does that fit in to our lives and our goals and our practice? You know, it's not about pushing yourself harder or doing more just for the sake of doing more. And it's important to also note that this might not apply to everyone, depending on your goals. You know, I'm just here to share my thoughts based on what I've seen over the years as a coach, a trauma-informed trainer, and also as somebody who practices movement with a neurodivergent brain and a complicated relationship to discipline and motivation. So let's get into it. Yeah, a lot of people start out with once a week training, right? Like that's pretty understandable. It feels both manageable and it's a pretty solid way to test the waters without overwhelming your schedule or your body or your wallet. And 1 session a week is better than 0 sessions a week, you know. But if your goal is to build strength and gain confidence, improve mobility, or create a tangible change in your movement patterns, once a week, you know, probably isn't going to be enough for long-term progress. And it's not because you're doing something wrong or anything wrong, but because your body literally doesn't have enough input to create meaningful change. I'm going to pivot to some neuroscience for a second. Okay, when you learn a new movement, whether that is a squat or a pull-up, or even just how you move through pain, you're building neuromuscular connections. That is your brain talking to your body through practice and repetition. The fewer times that you practice something, the slower your brain learns it. I think that that's a concept that we can generally grasp. You know, it's like learning a new language. If you practice once a week, it'll take longer to retain vocabulary, and the same thing happens with movement. So if you're only doing movement once every 7 to 10 days, your body's gonna forget it. You know, you have to relearn the pattern all over again. And that part, I think, is what makes progress feel like it's stalling, you know, even when you're showing up. And sometimes you just can't show up, right? That's okay. With that in mind, it's important to remember that it's not because your body can't. Your body just doesn't have enough data yet to adapt. Real quick, in case you don't have the attention span past this point of the video, I am going to make a mention about the flip side risks of going too often as a beginner later on in this video. So if you actually want to hear that, stick around. So beyond the physical, right, there's the emotional side of training. Doing something more often builds familiarity, and familiarity builds confidence. So if you've ever felt awkward doing a new movement or like you weren't sure what the fuck your body was doing, that's pretty normal, okay? But if you only give yourself 1 opportunity a week to practice, that awkwardness is going to linger longer. And that's to be expected, you know? More frequent exposure shortens that awkward phase because you get to build trust faster, you get more feedback loops more regularly, and then you start to feel, you start to recognize and understand when something is off or when something clicks. I think that sense of progress, that's probably one of the most motivating things in training, in physical movement practice, because you start going because you want to, not just because you should, right? Like you've built this connection, you've built this whether that's, conscious or not, you get this sense of I know what I'm doing. My body is understanding this movement now, and that is huge. That's a huge step. Anytime that starts happening to any of the members at the gym, at Han Training, where I work, which is the gym that I own, I get so excited because that's when you start really picking up more and more easily because you've built that connection. Even if it's small, I think that those things are very recognizable for me as a trainer, and to see in people. So I love pointing that out to folks because, I don't know, it's hard. I know it's hard. Life is so lifing, and it's challenging to do things consistently, especially when you feel like you don't understand what's happening, or when you feel like shit's awkward. I don't like it. Like that's so real. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, it does click at some point. You just have to kind of do it in order to become more familiar. There's also a principle in strength training called volume, which is basically the total amount of work that you do over time. Volume includes the number of reps, sets, weights, and sessions. And in most cases, if your body isn't receiving enough volume, it doesn't have a reason to adapt. Again, that doesn't mean that you should be pushing yourself to exhaustion, okay? But it does mean creating enough exposure that your body starts to respond and hold on to that. So more sessions just means more opportunities for patterning, and that's especially helpful if you're working on, building muscle, improving joint stability, developing technique, managing chronic pain or injury recovery, increasing coordination or proprioception. Even moving your body just 2 to 3 times a week consistently, intentionally, that can create a huge shift in how you feel. And then there's the nervous system. Okay, if you're someone with anxiety, trauma, neurodivergence, which usually leads to trauma, or any marginalized identity that leads to trauma and anxiety, your body might need more frequent and lower stakes exposure to movement in order to feel safe. So spacing out your training too much can actually create more resistance because your body forgets what felt good and then starts anticipating discomfort. It never quite settles into a rhythm. But when movement becomes a regular part of your week, your system starts to expect it. You're building rituals for yourself. So you know what to pack, when to leave, how long to recover. It becomes part of the pattern, not something that interrupts it. Okay, so real quick, I want to come back to something that I mentioned earlier because it's just as important as everything else we talked about, which is that more isn't always better. Okay, that's not what this video is saying. I'm not trying to say you should be going in like 6 days a week. If you want to, great, but it doesn't always mean that that's better, right? Especially if you're still new to movement or if you're self-teaching, there's a real risk of practicing something over and over without realizing that it's off or that it's wrong or that your form is off. Which brings me back to a phrase that I like to use regularly, which is that practice doesn't make perfect, okay? Practice makes permanence. If you keep doing a movement with faulty mechanics, your body just gets better at reinforcing that pattern. You might be doing it with more confidence or more weight or more reps, right? But if your form is off, it's still off. It just means you've gotten better at doing it incorrectly or not safely. and that's where injury and plateaus or frustration can start to show up. And also why it's worth having someone, a coach, a trainer, or even a friend who's knowledgeable, who can watch you. Someone who can offer you feedback that actually helps your brain and your body sync up and helps you build not just frequency, but intentionality. Because when you combine consistency with care, that's when things actually start to click well. And you can feel confident in doing more. Listen, okay? All this to say, if once a week is all you can do right now, emotionally, physically, financially, that's so valid, okay? There's no shame in starting slow. But if you have the space to do more and you're wondering whether it's worth it, the answer is probably yes. If that's something that you want for yourself, if that's something that you desire to build, then yes. More frequency means more feedback, more reps, more chances to be coached and corrected and celebrated. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be as simple as adding one more session a week, or switching between strength days and mobility days, or mixing structured training with play or exploration or something, something active that you like to do. Progress doesn't always mean pushing, right? It just means showing up more often in ways that your body and your brain can actually absorb. So I could probably go in harder and further and deeper, but wow, okay. Anyway, listen. The point is, I hope that this clarified and helped clarify why frequency matters. Okay, not because of grind culture or aesthetics, but because your body and your brain and your nervous system actually learn better when you give them more consistent information. And this is something that I try to build into the way that I teach and how we structure programs at the gym, at Han Training. But even if you're training, somewhere else or on your own, this still applies. Okay, you can take this anywhere. Give your body and your brain more chances to learn. I think that you'll be surprised at what it gives back to you. And if you really listen to yourself and to the feedback, it just means that you're learning to trust yourself more. And being able to do that builds confidence and self-awareness, and also I think helps us become better people because we're more aware of ourselves, not just in our brains, but like bodily. We can embody that and like bring that out into the world. So I hope this helps. I think I said that, but thank you for watching. I am always down to like shoot the shit about anything that you want to hear about, so drop a comment below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, answers to life's great questions. And don't forget to like and subscribe and whatever all the other things. I don't know, share the video if you think that it's helpful. I appreciate y'all. I hope you're having a good week. Don't forget to eat, stay safe, and love you. Bye.